Jake Collins wiped the grease from his hands and crawled out from under the massive engine unit. The ship's engine room was hot and filled with the smell of burning metal and strange alien oils. He had been working on the Crimson Fang for 3 months now, and he still could not get used to the weird sounds the alien machinery made. The job posting had seemed too good to be true. Good pay, travel to different planets, and all he had to do was keep the engines running. What they did not tell him was that he would be the only human on a ship full of alien hunters, who treated him like dirt. The ship shook slightly as it dropped out of hyperspace. Jake grabbed onto a support beam to steady himself. Through the small porthole in the engine room, he could see a red planet growing larger in the distance. This was Xerion 7, their destination. Captain Zethkar's voice came through the ship's speakers. The reptilian alien's words were translated into English by the ship's computer, but Jake could still hear the hissing sounds underneath. Attention all hunters. We have arrived at the hunting grounds. Prepare your weapons and gather in the main deck. Jake sighed and put away his tools. Whenever they reached a new planet, he had to help carry the aliens' hunting gear. It was not part of his job description, but nobody cared what the human thought. He made his way through the ship's corridors. The Crimson Fang was a luxury vessel with polished metal walls and fancy decorations from a dozen different worlds. Everything was built for creatures much larger than humans. Jake had to use a step stool to reach most of the control panels. The main deck was buzzing with excitement. A dozen alien hunters stood around checking their weapons and talking in their strange languages. Jake recognized most of them by now, though he tried to stay out of their way. Captain Zethkar stood in the center of the group. He was 8 feet tall with green scales and yellow eyes that never seemed to blink. His people, the Vorthans, had conquered half their star system before they learned to travel between worlds. They thought they were the best hunters in the galaxy. Near the weapons rack, 3 Krix nobles clicked their mandibles together in what Jake had learned was their version of laughter. They looked like giant insects walking on 2 legs with 4 arms each and compound eyes that could see in all directions. Their home planet was a hive world where only the strongest survived. Floating near the ceiling were 2 Nephil, their gas-filled bodies contained in clear suits with mechanical arms. They spoke by changing the color of their bodies, and the ship's computer translated the light patterns into words. Jake had heard that they could survive in the vacuum of space, which made them popular as scouts. In the corner, a Shardik sat perfectly still. It looked like a living crystal sculpture with a body made of what appeared to be colored glass. It communicated through sounds that were too high for most species to hear. The ship's computer had to lower the pitch so others could understand it. "Welcome, my fellow hunters," Captain Zethkar said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Today we hunt the greatest prize in the known galaxy, the Xerion Ripper." A murmur of excitement went through the group. Jake had heard them talk about these creatures before. They were supposed to be the most dangerous predators anyone had ever found. 12 feet tall, with claws that could cut through metal and the ability to disappear and reappear at will. One of the Krix nobles clicked its mandibles. "How many hunting parties have tried to take down a Ripper?" 43 expeditions in the last 10 years, the captain replied. "Only 12 hunters have returned alive, and none with a trophy." The Nephil floating near the ceiling changed colors. Rapidly, the computer translated, "That is what makes them so valuable. A Ripper hide is worth more than most planets." Jake shook his head. These aliens had traveled across the galaxy to hunt animals for sport. It reminded him of the old stories about rich people on Earth who used to hunt lions and elephants. At least those hunters had stayed on their own planet. "What about the human?" asked the Shardik, its crystal body creating a musical sound. "Should it remain on the ship?" Captain Zethkar looked at Jake like he was examining a piece of equipment. "The human will carry our supplies. These creatures are too weak to be of any real use, but they can serve as pack animals." The aliens laughed in their various ways. The Krix clicked their mandibles, the Nephil flashed bright colors, and the Shardak's body rang like a bell. Jake kept his face blank. He had learned not to show anger around these creatures. They saw it as weakness. "I will need someone to help." "With the equipment?" Jake said carefully. Some of those weapon cases are pretty heavy. You will manage, the captain said dismissively. Your species may be physically inferior, but you have opposable thumbs. That should be enough, Jake bit back his response. He had worked construction jobs on Earth that would have killed half these aliens, but there was no point in arguing. They had made up their minds about humans, and nothing he said would change that. The ship's computer announced that they were entering the planet's atmosphere. Through the large windows on the main deck, Jake could see Xerion 7 growing larger below them. The entire planet seemed to be covered in red forests, with no signs of cities or civilization. The Rippers live in the deep forests, Captain Zethkar explained to his guests. They are intelligent, possibly more so than most civilized species. They hunt in packs and have been known to set traps for unwary visitors. How do they disappear? Asked one of the Krix nobles. They can phase through solid matter for short periods, the captain replied. Our scientists believe they exist partially, in another dimension. It makes them nearly impossible to track with conventional sensors. The Nethul's body glowed with curiosity. How do we hunt something that can walk through walls? Patience and superior firepower, Captain Zethkar said, gesturing to the weapon racks. We have quantum disruptors that can hit them even while they are phased, plasma rifles that can burn through their armor, and gravity nets that can hold them in place. Jake looked at the weapons with interest. He had never seen technology like this before. On Earth, the most advanced weapons were still based on gunpowder and simple energy cells. These aliens had guns that could bend space and time. The ship landed with a gentle thud. Jake felt his stomach settle as the artificial gravity adjusted to match the planet's pull. Through the windows, he could see the red forest stretching to the horizon. The trees were massive, with trunks that must have been hundreds of feet wide. Gear up, Captain Zethkar commanded. We hunt at dawn. Jake spent the next hour loading equipment into carrying cases. The aliens' weapons were heavier than they looked, and their armor was made from materials he did not recognize. Everything was designed for creatures much larger and stronger than humans. As he worked, he listened to the aliens talk about their previous hunts. They had killed creatures on dozens of worlds, always looking for bigger and more dangerous prey. The Rippers were supposed to be the ultimate challenge, the one hunt that would prove their superiority over all other species. None of them seemed to consider that maybe, just maybe, there was a reason why so few hunters had returned from Xerion 7. They were so confident in their technology and their natural advantages that they could not imagine failing. Jake finished packing the last case and looked out at the red forest. Something about this planet felt different. The air seemed to hum with energy, and the shadows between the trees looked deeper than they should have been. He had spent his whole life in the wilderness areas of Earth, and he had learned to trust his instincts. This place was dangerous in ways the aliens did not understand. And tomorrow he would have to walk into those forests with them, carrying their equipment while they hunted something that had killed dozens of hunters before them. He just hoped he would live long enough to see home again. Jake woke up before dawn to the sound of alien voices echoing through the ship. The hunters were already getting ready, their excitement filling the air like electricity. He rolled out of his small bunk and pulled on his work clothes. Today he would be walking into one of the most dangerous places in the galaxy, carrying weapons for creatures who saw him as nothing more than a pack animal. The main deck was chaos. Aliens rushed around checking their equipment one more time. Captain. Zethkar stood near the exit ramp, his scales gleaming in the artificial light. He wore armor that looked like it could stop a meteor, and his plasma rifle was almost as tall as Jake. Human, the captain called out. Get the supply packs. We leave in 5 minutes. Jake nodded and went to the equipment room. The packs were heavy, filled with spare energy cells, emergency medical supplies, and backup weapons. Each one weighed about 80 pounds, and there were 6 of them. The aliens expected him to carry all of it. He strapped on the first pack and immediately felt the weight pressing down on his shoulders. The second pack went on his front. The third and fourth he carried in his hands. The last 2 he would have to drag behind him on a small cart. The exit ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics. Jake got his first real look at Xerion 7, and it took his breath away. The forest was unlike anything he had ever seen. The trees were massive, their red bark glowing softly in the morning light. Some of them were so wide that 20 people holding hands could not reach around them. The canopy was so thick that only small patches of sunlight reached the ground. The air smelled of something Jake could not identify. It was sweet and spicy at the same time, with an underlying scent that made his skin crawl. His grandfather had taught him to pay attention to smells when he was in the wilderness. This place smelled like a predator's den. "Stay close, human," Captain Zethkar said as they left the ship. "The Rippers can smell fear from miles away." The hunting party moved into the forest in a loose formation. The Krix nobles took point, their compound eyes scanning in all directions. The Nethel floated overhead, their gas-filled bodies drifting between the tree branches. The Shardek moved silently through the underbrush, its crystal body making no sound on the forest floor. Jake brought up the rear, struggling with the heavy packs. The cart kept getting stuck on roots and rocks, and he had to constantly adjust the straps to keep the equipment from falling off. The aliens moved ahead without waiting for him, their advanced armor making them faster and stronger than any human could be. After an hour of walking, they reached a clearing where the trees formed a natural circle. Captain Zethkar held up his hand for them to stop. He pulled out a device that looked like a cross between a telescope and a computer screen. "Ripper sign," he announced. "Fresh tracks, maybe 6 hours old?" Jake set down the packs and stretched his aching back. While the aliens gathered around their captain, he looked around the clearing. The ground was torn up in several places, and deep gouges in the tree bark showed where something with very large claws had been sharpening them. One of the Krix nobles clicked its mandibles nervously. "How big do you think it was?" "Adult male," the captain replied, studying his scanner. "Probably 12 feet tall, maybe 13. Weighed around 800 pounds. The Nethel floating overhead changed colors rapidly. The ship's computer translated. "That is larger than average. Most Rippers are only 10 feet tall, which means this one is either very old or very successful," Captain Zethkar said. "Either way, it will make an excellent trophy." Jake looked at the claw marks again. They were deep, cutting into the hard wood like it was soft clay. Whatever had made them was incredibly strong. He had seen bear claws back on Earth, but these were 3 times as long and twice as deep. The Shardak's body chimed softly. "Should we set up the trap here?" "No," the captain said. "This is just a marking post. Rippers use them to warn other predators away from their territory. The real hunt begins deeper in the forest." They moved on, following a game trail that wound between the massive trees. Jake noticed that the other animals of the forest seemed to have disappeared. There were no bird calls, no insect sounds, nothing but the soft whisper of wind through the leaves. Even the plants seemed different here, their colors darker and their shapes more twisted. His grandfather had taught him that when the forest went quiet, it meant something dangerous was nearby. The absence of normal forest sounds was nature's way of warning that a predator was hunting. The trail led them to a stream that ran red with mineral deposits from the rocks. The water was shallow but fast-moving, and Jake could see strange fish swimming in the depths. They had too many teeth and moved too quickly to be anything but predators themselves. "The Rippers drink here," Captain Zethkar explained. "See the prints in the mud?" Jake looked where the captain was pointing. The footprints were enormous, with 3 toes ending in claws that left marks like knife cuts. The prints were fresh, still sharp-edged, and not yet eroded by the flowing water. "How recent?" asked one of the Krix nobles. "Within the last hour," the captain replied. "We are getting close." The aliens checked their weapons again. Jake watched them adjust settings on their plasma rifles and test the energy readings on their quantum disruptors. The technology was far beyond anything humans had developed, but he could see the basic principles. Point, shoot, and hope you hit your target. They followed the stream for another half hour before the captain called for another stop. This time, his scanner was beeping urgently. "Multiple signals," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "At least 3 Rippers, maybe more? A pack?" The Nethul's body flashed with alarm. Rippers do not usually hunt in packs, Captain Zethkar said. But they have been known to work together when threatened. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the forest air. He had hunted with his grandfather since he was a child, and he knew that when predators started working together, it usually meant they saw you as a threat worth taking seriously. The forest around them had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Jake could hear his own heartbeat and the quiet hum of the aliens' equipment. Everything else was still as death. Then he heard it. A sound like nothing he had ever encountered before. It was deep and resonant, like the call of a whale, but with an edge that made his teeth ache. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the trees and the rocks. The aliens froze. Their weapons came up automatically, but they had nothing to aim at. The sound came again, longer this time, and Jake realized it was not just one voice. Multiple creatures were calling to each other, coordinating their movements. "They know we are here," Captain Zethkar whispered. The Shardak's body had gone completely clear, its normal colors fading to transparency. Jake had learned that this was how their species showed fear. The crystal being was terrified. "Should we retreat?" One of the Crix nobles asked, its mandibles clicking rapidly. "We are the hunters here," the captain said firmly. "We have superior weapons and armor. A few primitive beasts cannot match civilized technology." But Jake could see the doubt in the aliens' eyes. For all their advanced equipment and natural advantages, they were starting to realize that they might be out of their depth. The calls stopped as suddenly as they had begun. The forest returned to its unnatural silence. Jake looked around the clearing, trying to spot any movement in the shadows between the trees. His grandfather had taught him to look for things that did not belong, shapes that broke the natural. Patterns of the forest, that was when he saw it. A shadow that moved when the others did not. Something large and dark. Watching them from behind a cluster of red trees about 50 yards away, Jake opened his mouth to warn the others, but before he could speak, the shadow stepped into the light. The Ripper was even larger than the captain had estimated. It stood at least 14 feet tall, with a body that seemed to be made of living darkness. Its hide was black as space, but with an oily sheen that reflected the forest light in strange ways. Its claws were the size of kitchen knives, and its eyes were pools of liquid silver that seemed to look right through him. But what struck Jake most was its intelligence. This was not some mindless beast. The Ripper studied each member of the hunting party with the calculating gaze of a predator that understood exactly what it was facing. The aliens raised their weapons, but the Ripper did not attack. Instead, it tilted its head and made a sound. That was almost like laughter. Then it simply faded away, becoming transparent until it disappeared completely. "Where did it go?" The Nephil asked, its body flashing with panic. Captain Zethkar spun in a circle, his scanner beeping frantically. "It is still here. The readings show it is right next to us." Jake felt something brush against his shoulder. He turned, but there was nothing there. Then he heard breathing, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere very close. The Ripper was invisible, but it had not left. It was still watching them, studying their reactions, learning their weaknesses, and Jake realized that the real hunt was just beginning. The invisible Ripper circled them for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Jake could hear its breathing, a deep rumbling sound that seemed to come from a chest the size of a barrel. Sometimes he caught glimpses of disturbed leaves, or bent grass where the creature stepped. But it remained completely unseen. Captain Zethkar's scanner beeped constantly, but the readings made no sense. The device showed the Ripper everywhere at once, as if it existed in multiple places at the same time. The alien captain's scales had turned a darker shade of green, which Jake had learned meant fear. "We need to move," whispered one of the Crix nobles, its compound eyes darting in all directions. "Standing here makes us easy targets." "No," the captain said firmly. "Running will trigger its hunting instincts. We set up a perimeter and wait for it to make the first move." But the Ripper had already made its move. It had been studying them, learning their weaknesses, and planning its attack. Jake realized this when he noticed that the creature's breathing had stopped. The forest was silent again, but this time it felt different. This was the silence that came right before an attack. The Ripper materialized directly behind the Shardek. One moment there was empty air, the next moment a massive black form towered over the crystal being. The Ripper's claws swept down in a deadly arc, but the Shardek rolled away at the last second. The claws struck the ground where it had been standing, leaving gouges 6 inches deep in the hard-packed earth. "Fire!" Captain Zethkar shouted. The aliens opened up with everything they had. Plasma bolts, quantum disruptor beams, and gravity pulses filled the air. The forest lit up like a fireworks display as it advanced. Weapons discharged their energy into the space where the Ripper stood, but the creature was no longer there. It had phased out again, becoming transparent just as the first shots reached it. Most of the energy blasts passed right through its ghostly form and struck the trees behind it. Ancient wood exploded into splinters and flame. The Ripper reappeared 20 feet away, completely unharmed. It looked at the aliens with what Jake swore was amusement. Then it let out another one of those deep calls, and this time it was answered. From 3 different directions came similar calls, each one from a different Ripper. "They are hunting in a pack," the Nephil said, its body flashing rapid colors of panic. "This is not normal behavior." "Nothing about this is normal, Captain," Zethkar replied. "But we are civilized beings with superior technology. We can handle a few primitive beasts." The captain was wrong, and Jake could see it in the aliens' eyes. These creatures were not primitive. They were ancient, evolved, and perfectly adapted to their environment. They had survived 43 hunting expeditions and learned from each encounter. The attacks began in earnest. The Rippers came from all directions, appearing and disappearing like deadly ghosts. They never stayed solid long enough for the aliens to get a clean shot, but their claws were real enough when they struck. The first casualty was one of the Crix nobles. It had been scanning the trees overhead when a Ripper materialized directly. Above it, the creature's claws came down like spears, piercing the insect's armored shell. The Crix let out a high-pitched scream that was cut short as the Ripper dragged it into the underbrush. Jake heard the sound of tearing metal and breaking chitin, followed by a wet crunching that made his stomach turn. The Crix was dead and the Ripper was feeding. "Defensive circle," Captain Zethkar commanded. "Back to back. Do not let them separate us." The remaining hunters formed a tight group, their weapons pointing outward. Jake crouched in the center with the equipment packs, feeling useless and exposed. The alien's advanced armor might stop the Ripper's claws, but his human skin would tear like paper. The second attack came from below. The ground erupted as a Ripper burst up from what must have been a tunnel. It grabbed one of the Nephil's containment suits and squeezed. The clear material cracked, and the gaseous alien inside began to leak out. The Nephil's body flashed desperate colors as it tried to repair the breach, but the damage was too severe. Its gas escaped into the forest air, and the creature began to deflate like a punctured balloon. Within minutes, it was dead. Jake watched in horror as the Ripper examined the empty suit with obvious intelligence. It seemed to understand that the real alien had been the gas inside, not the mechanical shell. These creatures were learning their enemies' weaknesses with frightening speed. The third attack was the most disturbing. A Ripper appeared in the middle of their defensive circle, somehow having phased through the ground itself. It stood among them for a moment, close enough to touch, then faded away again without attacking. "It could have killed us all," whispered the Shardek, its crystal body trembling. "Why did it not attack?" asked the remaining Crix noble. Jake knew the answer, though he did not want to say it out loud. The Ripper was playing with them. It wanted them to know that their defenses were useless, that it could kill them whenever it chose. The creature was not just hunting for food or territory. It was hunting for sport. Just like the aliens had been, the psychological warfare was working. The aliens were starting to panic. They fired at shadows, wasted energy on false targets, and jumped at every sound. Their superior technology meant nothing if they could not hit their targets, Captain Zethkar tried to maintain control, but Jake could see the fear in his yellow eyes. The reptilian captain had hunted dangerous creatures across the galaxy, but he had never faced anything like this. "We need to get back to the ship," the captain said finally. "Regroup and plan a better strategy." But the Rippers had other plans. As the hunting party tried to retreat, the creatures began herding them away from the path back to their ship. Every time they tried to go in the right direction, a Ripper would appear and force them to change course. Jake realized what was happening. The Rippers were driving them deeper into the forest, away from their technology and their safe haven. They were being hunted by creatures that understood strategy and tactics better than most military commanders. The aliens' equipment began to malfunction. Their scanners gave false readings, their communication devices filled with static, and their weapons started to overheat. Jake suspected the Rippers were somehow interfering with their technology, but he had no proof. As they stumbled through the red forest, driven by invisible predators, the aliens began to turn on each other. The stress and fear brought out the worst in their different species. "This is your fault," the Sharduk accused the captain. "You said these creatures were just animals." "They are animals," Captain Zethkar replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "We just underestimated their intelligence." The remaining Krix noble clicked its mandibles angrily. "Intelligence? They are toying with us like we are prey animals." And that was exactly what they were, Jake realized. The hunters had become the hunted. The aliens, with their advanced technology and superior attitudes, were being systematically destroyed by creatures they had dismissed as primitive beasts. The forest grew darker as they were driven deeper into Ripper territory. The trees here were older and larger, their trunks so massive that they blocked out most of the sky. Strange sounds echoed from the shadows, and Jake caught glimpses of movement that might have been more Rippers or might have been his imagination. They found temporary shelter in a small clearing surrounded by fallen logs. The aliens set up what defenses they could, but their equipment was failing and their ammunition was running low. Captain Zethkar's plasma rifle was down to quarter power, and the gravity nets they had brought to trap Rippers were not working properly. "How many of them are there?" the Sharduk asked, its crystal body dim with exhaustion. "At least 4, the captain replied. "Maybe more." Jake looked around the clearing and noticed something the aliens had missed. The fallen logs were not randomly placed. They formed a pattern, creating barriers that would funnel any escape attempts into specific directions. The Rippers had been preparing this trap for a long time. "We need to move," he said quietly. "This is a kill zone." Captain Zethkar glared at him. "You're just a human. What could you possibly know about hunting?" Before Jake could answer, the attack began. This time, all the Rippers came at once. They materialized from every direction, their claws gleaming in the dim forest light. The aliens opened fire, but their weapons were too slow and their aim was off. The remaining Krix noble fell first. Its armor cracked open like an egg. The Sharduk tried to run but shattered against a tree trunk when a Ripper's claw caught it across the back. The pieces of its crystal body scattered across the floor like broken glass. Captain Zethkar was the only alien left, and he was surrounded. His plasma rifle was completely dead, and his armor was cracked in several places. The Ripper circling him was the largest one yet, almost 15 feet tall and covered in scars from previous battles. Jake crouched behind a fallen log, watching the captain face his death. The alien had treated him like dirt for months, but he was still a living being. Jake could not just watch him die, but as he prepared to help, something made him stop. The Ripper was not attacking. It was studying the captain, tilting its head from side to side like a curious animal. Then it looked directly at Jake's hiding place. The creature's silver eyes met his, and Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The Ripper knew he was there. It had known all along. The Ripper's claws descended toward Captain Zethkar's head. The alien captain closed his yellow eyes and prepared for death. He had hunted across the galaxy, killed creatures on dozens of worlds, and now he was about to become prey himself. Jake could not watch it happen. Without thinking, he grabbed a fallen branch and jumped over the log he had been hiding behind. The branch was thick as his arm and about 4 feet long, not much of a weapon against a 15-foot monster, but it was all he had. "Hey!" Jake shouted, swinging the branch at the Ripper's back leg. The wood struck the creature's hide with a solid thunk like hitting a leather punching bag. The Ripper did not even flinch, but it did turn around. The massive creature looked down at Jake with what seemed like surprise. Its silver eyes studied the small human standing there with a stick, as if trying to figure out what kind of creature would be stupid enough to attack something 50 times its size. Captain. Zethkar opened his eyes and stared at Jake in amazement. The human had just saved his life, even after months of being treated like a servant. The alien captain could not understand why this weak creature would risk itself for someone who had shown it nothing but contempt. The Ripper made a sound that was almost like a chuckle. It had been hunting for probably centuries, and it had never encountered anything quite like this. Most prey animals ran when they saw a predator. The few that fought back usually had claws or teeth or armor. This tiny creature had nothing but a piece of wood and apparently no sense of self-preservation. Jake took a step back as the Ripper moved toward him. The creature was even bigger up close, its shoulders wider than a truck, and its claws longer than sword blades. Its hide was not just black, but seemed to absorb light, making it look like a hole in the world, shaped like a monster. "Run, human," Captain Zethkar whispered. "It will kill you." But Jake did not run. He had been running from these aliens' contempt for months, accepting their insults and their dismissal of his entire species. He was tired of being seen as weak, tired of being treated like he did not matter. Maybe he was about to die, but he would not go down without a fight. The Ripper swung one massive claw at him. Jake ducked under it, feeling the wind as the razor-sharp talons passed over his head. He swung his branch again, this time aiming for the creature's knee. The wood struck hard enough to sting his hands, but the Ripper barely noticed. What the creature did notice was Jake's speed. The human was faster than it had expected, moving with a quickness that reminded the Ripper of smaller predators from its home territory. This was not the slow, clumsy movement of most prey animals. Jake rolled to the side as the Ripper's other claw came down where he had been standing. The talons gouged deep furrows in the earth, but Jake was already moving. He had learned to hunt. With his grandfather in the woods of Michigan, chasing deer and wild boar through thick forest. He knew how to move quietly, how to change direction without warning, how to use the terrain to his advantage. The Ripper phased out, becoming transparent, as it tried to catch the elusive human. But when it reappeared, Jake was not where it expected him to be. The human had somehow predicted where the creature would materialize, and had moved to a different position. This had never happened before. The Ripper's phasing ability had always been its greatest weapon. No other creature had ever been able to track its movements while it was invisible. Yet this small human seemed to know exactly where it was going to appear. Jake was using skills his grandfather had taught him, skills that went back thousands of years to when humans were still learning to hunt on the African plains. He was not trying to overpower the Ripper or outrun it. He was trying to tire it out, to make it waste energy on attacks that missed their target. Persistence hunting, his grandfather had called it. The art of wearing down prey by never giving up, never stopping, never letting them rest. Humans had used this technique to hunt animals much larger and stronger than themselves. Following them for days until exhaustion made them easy targets, the Ripper began to grow frustrated. It was used to quick kills, to prey that either ran in panic or died in the first attack. This human was different. Every time the creature thought it had the small being cornered, Jake would slip away at the last second. Captain Zethkar watched in amazement as the human fought for his life. The alien captain had seen many battles, but he had never seen anything like this. Jake was not just surviving against impossible odds. He was actually making the Ripper work for its kill. The human's movements were not random. There was a pattern. To them, a strategy that the captain was beginning to understand. Jake was studying the Ripper just as intensely as it was studying him. Every attack, every phase shift, every movement was being analyzed and learned. The Ripper tried a new tactic. It phased out and stayed invisible for a full minute, moving silently through the forest as it tried to find the perfect angle of attack. But when it reappeared, Jake was already turning to face it. The human had somehow tracked the creature's movements even while it was invisible. Jake was using his ears more than his eyes. The Ripper might be able to become transparent, but it could not eliminate its weight. When it moved, it still disturbed the air, still caused tiny vibrations in the ground. Jake had learned to hunt by sound as well as sight, and those skills were keeping him alive. The creature began to make mistakes. It was no longer the patient, calculating predator that had systematically destroyed the alien hunting party. Frustration was making it sloppy, causing it to attack too quickly or hold its solid form too long. Jake took advantage of every mistake. When the Ripper overextended itself trying to grab him, he struck at its wrist with his branch. When it turned too sharply, he was already moving to its blind side. He was not doing any real damage, but he was wearing the creature down. The Ripper had been hunting for hours, first stalking the alien party and then fighting this persistent human. It was beginning to tire, and Jake could see it in the creature's movements. Its attacks were becoming slower, its phase shifts less precise, but Jake was tiring too. His clothes were soaked with sweat, and his muscles ached from the constant movement. The branch he had been using as a weapon was starting to crack from the impacts. He could not keep this up much longer. The Ripper seemed to realize this. It stopped its attacks and stood perfectly still, studying the human with its silver eyes. Jake could see intelligence there, a calculating mind that was trying to figure out how this small creature had managed to survive so long. Then the Ripper did something unexpected. It began to phase out slowly, becoming partially transparent but not completely invisible. Jake could still see it, but the creature's form was ghostly and indistinct. It was testing something, trying to understand the limits of the human's abilities. Jake realized what was happening. The Ripper was learning from their fight just as much as he was. It was adapting its tactics, trying new approaches, treating their battle as a puzzle to be solved rather than a simple hunt. This was the moment. Jake understood the true nature of his opponent. The Ripper was not just a predator. It was an intelligent being, possibly as smart as any civilized species in the galaxy. It had been playing with the alien hunters not out of cruelty, but out of curiosity, trying to understand these strange creatures that had invaded its territory. But Jake was different. He was not trying to conquer or dominate. He was just trying to survive, using skills that were older than civilization itself. And that seemed to fascinate the creature. The Ripper solidified again and made a sound that was almost like speech. It was not attacking anymore, just watching, waiting to see what the human would do next. Jake lowered his branch and looked directly into the creature's eyes. For a moment, predator and prey stared at each other across the small clearing. Two very different species, both products of evolution, both perfectly adapted to their roles in the great game of survival. The moment passed. The Ripper's hunting instincts took over, and it prepared for what it intended to be the final attack. But Jake was ready too. He had been studying the creature's movements, learning its patterns, preparing for this moment. The real fight was about to begin. The Ripper launched itself at Jake with the full force of its massive body. This time there was no playfulness, no testing of abilities. The creature had decided that the human had to die, and it was bringing everything it had to the fight. Jake threw himself to the side, but not fast enough. The Ripper's claws caught his shoulder, tearing through his shirt and leaving 3 long cuts across his back. Pain flared through his body, but he kept moving. His grandfather had taught him that in a real fight, you ignored pain until the fight was over. The creature spun around with surprising speed for something so large. Its tail whipped through the air where Jake had been a second before. If it had connected, it would have broken every bone in his body. Jake rolled behind a fallen log and tried to catch his breath. The cuts on his back were bleeding, but they were not deep enough to be dangerous. The Ripper's claws were sharp, but they were designed for killing large prey with single strikes. Against a small, fast-moving target like Jake, they were less effective. The Ripper phased through the log as if it were not there, and appeared directly in front of Jake. Its silver eyes glowed with predatory focus as it raised both claws for a killing blow, but Jake was already moving. He had learned the creature's timing, the brief moment between when it became solid and when it could attack. He rolled between the Ripper's legs and came up behind it, his broken branch striking at the back of the creature's knee. The impact sent shock waves up Jake's arms. But this time he felt something give. The Ripper stumbled, its perfect balance disrupted for just a moment. Jake had found a weak spot, a place where the creature's armor was thinner. The Ripper roared in pain and anger. It was the first time Jake had actually heard it, and the creature did not like the experience. It spun around and lashed out with both claws, but Jake was already gone. Moving with the fluid grace of someone who had spent his life in the wilderness, Captain Zethkar watched from behind a tree, unable to believe what he was seeing. The human was not just surviving against the galaxy's most dangerous predator, he was actually fighting it to a standstill. The alien captain had seen many battles, but nothing like this. Jake circled the Ripper, looking for another opening. The creature's knee was swollen where he had hit it, and it was favoring that leg. But it was still incredibly dangerous, and Jake knew he could not keep dodging forever. The Ripper tried to phase out again, but Jake was ready. He had figured out the creature's pattern, the way it moved when it was preparing to shift between dimensions. As the Ripper became transparent, Jake threw his branch like a spear. The wood passed through the creature's ghostly form, but Jake was not aiming for the Ripper itself. He was aiming for the space where it would reappear. The branch struck the ground and bounced up just as the Ripper solidified. Hitting it in the face, the creature staggered backward, more surprised than hurt. In all its years of hunting, nothing had ever predicted its phase shifts with such accuracy. This human was reading its movements like a book, anticipating its actions before it made them. Jake did not have his branch anymore, but he did not need it. The forest provided plenty of weapons for someone who knew how to use them. He grabbed a handful of dirt and small stones, then waited for the Ripper's next attack. The creature charged him, its injured leg making it slightly slower than before. Jake waited until the last possible second, then threw the dirt and stones directly into the Ripper's eyes. The creature roared and shook its head, temporarily blinded. Jake used the opportunity to grab a larger rock, about the size of a softball, and strike the Ripper's injured knee with all his strength. This time the crack was audible. The Ripper's leg buckled, and it fell to one knee. Jake had damaged something important, either bone or tendon. The creature was no longer as mobile as it had been, but it was far from defeated. The Ripper lashed out with its claws, forcing Jake to jump back. Even on one good leg, the creature was still deadly. Its reach was enormous, and its claws could cut through steel. Jake knew he had to end this fight soon. He was getting tired, and the cuts on his back were starting to affect his movements. The Ripper might be injured, but it had much more stamina than any human. He looked around the clearing, searching for anything he could use as a weapon. There were plenty of rocks and branches, but nothing that would do serious damage to a creature with armor like the Ripper's. Then he saw it. One of the fallen logs had a sharp, broken end where it had snapped off from its tree. The point was about as long as his arm and looked hard, enough to punch through almost anything. The problem was getting the Ripper into position. The creature was not stupid. It had learned to be cautious around the human, to respect his speed and unpredictability. It would not be easy to trick it into impaling itself. Jake began to move toward the log, but slowly, as if he were just trying to put distance between himself and the Ripper. The creature followed, limping on its injured leg but still dangerous. When Jake reached the log, he pretended to stumble and fall. The Ripper's eyes lit up with predatory excitement. Finally, the human had made a mistake. The creature gathered itself and lunged forward, both claws extended for a killing strike. But Jake's stumble had been fake. As the Ripper committed to its attack, he rolled to the side and grabbed the creature's wounded leg. Using every ounce of strength he had, he pulled the leg sideways, sending the Ripper crashing directly into the sharp end of the log. The pointed would punch through the creature's chest with a wet, tearing sound. The Ripper's eyes went wide with shock and pain. It tried to phase out, but the log prevented it from shifting dimensions. It was trapped, solid, and vulnerable. Jake did not hesitate. He grabbed another rock and began striking the Ripper's head with methodical precision. Each blow was calculated, aimed at the creature's temples and the base of its skull. He was not acting out of anger or bloodlust, but with the cold efficiency of a predator finishing its prey. The Ripper tried to fight back, but the log through its chest had damaged vital organs. Its movements became weaker and more desperate. Jake continued his assault, using rocks, branches, and anything else he could find. Captain Zethkar watched in horror as the human systematically destroyed the galaxy's most feared predator. There was something terrifying about Jake's calm, methodical approach to killing. This was not the wild fury of a cornered animal, but the calculated violence of an apex predator. The Ripper's struggles grew weaker. Its silver eyes began to dim, and its breathing became labored. Jake could see that the creature was dying, but he did not stop. He had learned from his grandfather that when you were hunting something dangerous, you made sure it stayed dead. Finally, the Ripper's massive body went still. Its eyes closed and its breathing stopped. The creature that had terrorized hunters across the galaxy was dead, killed by a human with nothing but rocks and sticks. Jake stood over the body, breathing heavily. His clothes were torn and bloody, his hands were scraped and bruised, but he was alive. He had done something that 43 hunting expeditions had failed to do. He had killed a Xerion Ripper with his bare hands. Captain Zethkar emerged from his hiding place, staring at Jake with a mixture of awe and terror. The alien captain had seen many predators in his time, but none as frightening as this small human, who had just dismantled a creature 50 times his size. "How?" the captain whispered. "How did you do that?" Jake looked at the dead Ripper, then at the alien captain. "My grandfather taught me that the strongest predator is not always the one with the biggest claws or the sharpest teeth. Sometimes it is the one that refuses to give up." The captain nodded slowly, finally understanding something about humans that he had never realized before. They were not weak because they lacked natural weapons or armor. They were strong because they never stopped fighting, never stopped learning, never stopped adapting. As they made their way back to the ship, Captain Zethkar found himself looking at Jake with new respect. The human had saved his life and defeated an enemy that had seemed impossible to kill. More importantly, he had shown that humans were not the primitive creatures the galaxy believed them to be. Word of what happened on Xerion 7 spread quickly through the galactic community. The story of a human killing a Ripper with his bare hands became legend, told and retold in cantinas and trading posts across known space. Some aliens dismissed the story as impossible, but others began to look at humans with new eyes. If one human could kill a Ripper, what could millions of humans do? What could billions of them accomplish? The galaxy had underestimated humanity for too long. They had seen humans as weak newcomers barely worthy of notice. But Jake Collins had shown them the truth. Humans were not just another species to be catalogued and dismissed. They were the species that never learned to quit. And that made them the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. Jake returned to Earth a few months later, carrying with him the respect of beings who had once treated him like a servant. He never spoke much about what happened on Xerion 7, but those who knew him could see the change in his eyes. He had looked into the face of the galaxy's most feared predator and refused to blink. And in doing so, he had reminded the universe that humanity's greatest strength was not in their technology or their weapons, but in their absolute refusal to give up when everything seemed hopeless.